They ignored her early in the night, until the Mafia Boss arrived and placed her at his side. That single, satisfying moment when everyone who looked through you suddenly cannot look away. That is exactly what happened to a young woman named Elena Vasquez on a cold Friday evening in Manhattan, and by the time the night was over, not a single person in that room would ever forget her name. But before we get to that moment, before we get to the powerful man who changed everything with just 5 words, you need to understand who Elena was, where she came from, and why every single person at that party made the biggest mistake of their lives by pretending she did not exist. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, tucked inside a silver envelope with embossed lettering that Elena had to read twice before she believed it was real. The Castellano Foundation Annual Gala, the most exclusive charity event on the entire East Coast. 700 guests. A venue. On the top floor of the Meridian Grand Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Black tie. By invitation only. Elena had stared at that envelope for a long time, sitting on the edge of her twin bed in the small apartment she shared with her younger sister Rosa in Washington Heights. The radiator in the corner clanked and hissed. The sounds of traffic on Broadway filtered through the thin window, and Elena held that envelope like it was made of glass. She was 26 years old. She worked as a seamstress at a small alteration shop on 163rd Street, a place called Bella Costuras, owned by an elderly Dominican woman named Doña Carmen, who had taken Elena under her wing 4 years ago when Elena had arrived in New York with nothing but a suitcase, $200, and a dream she was almost too afraid to say out loud. Elena wanted to be a fashion designer, not just any designer. She wanted to create clothes that told stories, garments that carried the soul of the people who wore them. Back in her hometown of El Paso, Texas, where she had grown up in a modest house near the border, her mother had taught her to sew before she could even write her own name. Her mother, a quiet woman named Guadalupe, who cleaned offices at night and took in mending during the day, had hands that could turn the cheapest fabric into something beautiful. Those hands had taught Elena everything, every stitch, every cut, every secret about how cloth moves with the human body. But Guadalupe had passed away when Elena was 19, taken by an illness that moved too quickly for anyone to stop. And Elena's father had been gone long before that, a man who left when Elena was 7 and never looked back. So Elena had raised Rosa mostly on her own, working double shifts, saving every penny and sewing late into the night in the back room of their small apartment, creating designs that no one had ever seen, until 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Elena had done something that terrified her. She had entered a design competition sponsored by the Castellano Foundation, a contest open to unknown designers from underrepresented communities. She had submitted 3 original pieces, garments she had sewn by hand in her apartment using fabrics she had bought from discount stores in the garment district. She had photographed them on Rosa, who had stood patiently in their tiny living room while Elena adjusted every fold, every drape, every angle of light from their one good lamp. Elena had not expected to win. She had not even expected to be noticed. There were over 4,000 entries from across the country, but somehow, impossibly, she had been selected as one of 12 finalists, and the invitation to the gala was part of the prize. All 12 finalists would attend, their designs would be displayed, and the winner would be announced at the end of the evening by none other than Vincent Castellano himself. Vincent Castellano. Even the name carried weight. He was one of the most powerful men. In New York, a billionaire businessman who had built an empire in real estate, hospitality, and luxury brands. But Vincent Castellano was not just wealthy. He was legendary. The media called him the Don, a nickname that had followed him for decades, partly because of his Italian heritage, partly because of his commanding presence, and partly because of the rumors that had swirled around his family for generations. The Castellano family had roots in Sicily that went back over a century. Vincent's grandfather, Don Enzo Castellano, had arrived in New York in 1923 and had built a small importing business that grew into something much larger under circumstances that historians still debated. By the time Vincent's father, Marco, took over in the 1960s, the family had legitimate business interests worth hundreds of millions. But the whispers never stopped. The Castellano name carried a shadow, a suggestion of power that went beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. Vincent himself had spent his entire adult life trying to redefine that name. He had earned an MBA from Wharton. He had taken the family business fully legitimate decades ago. He had donated hundreds of millions to charity. He had created foundations, funded hospitals, built schools. But the nickname persisted. The Don. The Boss. People still spoke his name in hushed tones. People still moved out of his way when he entered a room. Not because they feared him exactly, but because Vincent Castellano had a presence that was almost gravitational. When he looked at you, you felt it in your bones. Elena knew all of this, everyone knew all of this, and the idea of being in the same room as Vincent Castellano made her stomach knot with anxiety. But the invitation was real, the opportunity was real, and Elena was not the kind of woman who ran from things that scared her. So on that cold Friday evening in December, Elena put on the dress she had made for herself. It was the best thing she had ever created, a floor-length gown of deep emerald green that she had constructed from a bolt of silk she had found at a warehouse sale in Brooklyn. She had spent every night for 2 weeks working on it, stitching by hand, adding delicate beadwork along the neckline that caught the light like scattered stars. It was simple, it was elegant, it was unmistakably the work of someone who understood fabric the way a musician understands sound. Rosa had helped her with her hair, pulling it back into a low chignon that showed off Elena's high cheekbones and dark eyes. Rosa had lent her the only pair of real gold earrings they owned, tiny hoops that had belonged to their mother, and when Elena looked at herself in the cracked mirror that hung on the back of their bedroom door, she saw someone she almost did not recognize. She looked beautiful. She looked like she belonged, but belonging, Elena would soon discover, was not something that a beautiful dress could guarantee. The taxi dropped her off at the Meridian Grand at exactly 8:15. The hotel rose above her like a cathedral of glass and steel, its lobby ablaze with golden light that spilled out onto the sidewalk. Town cars and limousines lined the curb, discharging passengers in fur coats and tailored tuxedos. Doormen in white gloves held the doors. A red carpet stretched from the entrance to the elevator bank. Elena stepped out of the taxi and immediately felt the temperature change, not the weather, the atmosphere. She could feel it the moment her feet touched the sidewalk. The looks, the assessments, the quick dismissive glances from people who catalogued her in a fraction of a second and filed her under not one of us. She walked through the lobby with her chin up, the way her mother had always told her to walk. Guadalupe used to say, "Mija, the world will try to make you small, do not let it. Walk like you have a right to be wherever you are, because you do." Elena walked like she had a right to be there. The elevator took her to the 42nd floor, where the grand ballroom occupied the entire level. When the doors opened, Elena stepped into a world she had only ever seen in magazines. The ballroom was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. Round tables draped in white linen dotted the room, each one set with fine china and silver. A live orchestra played softly in one corner. Waiters in black moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvre. And the people were extraordinary. Elena recognized faces from television, from newspapers, from the covers of business magazines. There were hedge fund managers and tech entrepreneurs, fashion editors and gallery owners, politicians and philanthropists. Diamonds glittered on wrists and necks. Watches that cost more than Elena's annual salary caught the light with every gesture. Elena took a breath and stepped into the room. The first 30 minutes were fine. She found the area where the 12 finalist designs were displayed on elegant mannequins behind velvet ropes. She saw her own 3 pieces and felt a surge of pride. They looked good, more than good. They held their own against the other entries, each of which was impressive in its own way. Eleanor studied them all carefully, appreciating the craftsmanship, the creativity, the bold choices her fellow finalists had made. But then she tried to mingle. And that was when the evening began to turn. She approached a group of women standing near the bar, 3 well-dressed women in their 40s who were laughing about something. Eleanor smiled and introduced herself. She said she was one of the design finalists. She said it was a beautiful event. The women looked at her. One of them, a blonde woman in a black Valentino gown, gave her a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, that's nice," the woman said. And then she turned back to her friends as if Elena had evaporated. Elena stood there for a moment, the smile fading from her face. Then she moved on. She tried again with a small group near one of the windows, 2 men in tuxedos discussing real estate. She waited for a pause in their conversation and introduced herself. One of the men glanced at her dress not with admiration, but with the kind of quick appraisal that calculates cost. "Which firm are you with?" he asked. "I'm one of the design competition finalists," Elena said. "Ah," the man said, and something shifted in his expression. A subtle dimming, like a light being turned down. "Right, good luck with that." He turned back to his companion. Eleanor got the message. She was not a guest, she was a contestant, and in this room, that was a very different thing. These people were here because they belonged to a world of money and influence. Elena was here because she had won a spot in a contest. She was decoration, background, a charitable talking point. She moved through the crowd, like a ghost, invisible in her emerald gown, unseen despite being one of the reasons the event existed. She tried 4 more times to join conversations, to connect with someone, anyone. Each time, the result was the same. Polite but empty smiles, brief acknowledgements followed by turned backs, eyes that slid over her and found something more interesting on the other side of the room. By 9 o'clock, Elena had retreated to a small table near the edge of the ballroom, close to the windows. She sat, alone, her champagne untouched, watching the city lights shimmer 42 stories below. She could see her reflection in the glass, a young woman in a green dress sitting by herself at the most exclusive party in New York. She thought about calling Rosa. She thought about leaving. She thought about all the nights she had stayed up sewing, the sacrifices she had made, the dream that had carried her from El Paso to this glittering room where no one wanted to talk to her. She was about to stand up and go when a waiter approached her table and set down a fresh glass of champagne. "I didn't order this," Elena said. The waiter, an older man with kind eyes, leaned slightly closer. "You looked like you could use it, miss. And if I may say, that dress you're wearing is the most beautiful thing in this room." Eleanor looked up at him, and for the first time that evening, she felt seen. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded and moved away, and Eleanor sat there holding the glass, trying to decide if she had the strength to stay. She decided to stay, not because she was having a good time, not because she believed anything would change. She stayed because her mother had taught her to finish what she started, no matter how hard it got, and because somewhere, deep in her chest, there was a small stubborn flame that refused to go out. She had no idea that everything was about to change. Now, before we continue, check if you are subscribed to this channel. If stories about real people overcoming impossible odds are the kind of content that moves you, then this is where you belong. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what happens next, because trust me, you are not ready for what Vincent Castellano is about to do. It was 9:47 when the energy in the room shifted. Eleanor felt it before she understood it. A ripple that moved through the crowd like a wave. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The orchestra seemed to play a little softer, as if even the music knew to make room. And then she saw him. Vincent Castellano entered the ballroom through the main doors, and the effect was immediate. He was 63 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from something hard and then weathered by decades of wind. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo with no tie. The collar of his white shirt opened just enough to suggest that formality was something he chose, not something imposed upon him. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they moved across the room with the calm precision of a man who was used to being watched. He was flanked by 2 men in dark suits who were clearly security, though they kept a respectful distance. Behind them came a small entourage of associates, men and women in expensive clothes who moved in Vincent's orbit like planets around a sun. The crowd parted for him, not dramatically, not obviously, but it parted. People stepped aside, created pathways, angled their bodies to give him room. And as he moved through the ballroom, he greeted people with handshakes and brief words, a nod here, a hand on a shoulder there. He knew everyone's name. He remembered details. He asked about wives and husbands, about children, about business deals and vacation homes. And every person he spoke to stood a little taller afterward, as if Vincent's attention had given them something they could carry for the rest of the night. Eleanor watched all of this from her table by the window. She watched the way the room reorganized itself around this man, the way gravity seemed to work differently in his presence, and she thought, so that is what power looks like. She had no intention of approaching him. She had learned her lesson about approaching people at this party, and besides, what would she say? Hello, I am a seamstress from Washington Heights, and I made this dress myself, and everyone here has been treating me like I am invisible. That would go over well. So she sat, and she watched. And she waited for the evening to end so she could go home and tell Rosa that the gala had been an experience, which was the kind of word you used when you did not want to say it was awful. But something was happening that Eleanor could not see. Something that had been set in motion weeks ago, in a quiet office on the top floor of the Castellano Tower on Park Avenue, where Vincent had sat with a large portfolio of photographs and design sketches spread across his mahogany desk. 3 weeks earlier, Vincent had been reviewing the finalists for the design competition personally. This was unusual. He typically delegated the creative decisions to his foundation team, a group of curators and fashion industry experts who knew far more about design than he did. But this year something had caught his eye. It was the photograph of Elena's second piece, a structured jacket made from reclaimed denim that she had deconstructed and rebuilt into something architectural and fluid at the same time. The jacket had been photographed on Rosa, who wore it with a simple white t-shirt and jeans, standing on the fire escape of their apartment with the Washington Heights skyline behind her. Vincent had stared at that photograph for a long time. Then he had looked at the other 2 pieces Elena had submitted. Then he had read her application essay, a 2-page document in which she described growing up in El Paso, learning to sew from her mother, and believing that fashion should not be a language spoken only by the wealthy. He had set the essay down and picked up his phone. Margaret, he had said to his assistant, find out everything you can about this woman, Elena Vasquez. Margaret had done her job with her usual efficiency. Within 48 hours, Vincent knew about Elena's background, her work at Bella Costuras, her living situation in Washington Heights, her sister Rosa, and the small but devoted following she had built on social media, where she posted videos of herself creating garments from inexpensive materials and explaining her design philosophy in a way that was so genuine and passionate that even people who knew nothing about fashion found themselves watching until the end. Vincent had watched every single one of those videos, and something had happened that rarely happened to Vincent Castellano. He had been moved, not because of the clothes, though the clothes were extraordinary. He had been moved because he recognized something in Elena that he had seen only a handful of times in his long life. He recognized hunger, not the desperate kind, not the greedy kind, the kind that burns clean and steady, like a flame that cannot be extinguished because it is fed by something deeper than ambition. It is fed by purpose. Vincent knew that kind of hunger. He had felt it himself decades ago when he was a young man trying to prove that the Castellano name could mean something other than what the newspapers said it meant. He had felt it when he had sat in boardrooms where people dismissed him because of his last name, where they looked at him and saw only the shadow of his grandfather, only the rumors and the whispers. He had spent 40 years proving them wrong, building something real and legitimate and worthy of respect. And now he saw that same fire in a 26-year-old seamstress from El Paso, and it stirred something in him that he thought had gone quiet long ago. So Vincent had made a decision. He would attend the gala personally. He would review the finalists' designs himself, and he would make sure that the best designer won, regardless of their connections, their background, or their zip code. But Vincent had also done something else, something that no one except Margaret knew about. He had asked his foundation team to send him weekly updates on how the finalists were being treated in the lead-up to the gala. He wanted to know if they were being supported, if they were being given resources, if they were being made to feel welcome. And what he had learned had not pleased him. The reports showed that the 12 finalists had been divided, unofficially and perhaps unconsciously, into two groups. There were the finalists who came from established backgrounds, who had attended design schools, who had connections in the industry. These finalists had been contacted by foundation staff, offered mentorship, invited to pre-event gatherings. And then there were the finalists who came from nowhere, who had no connections, no credentials, no social currency. These finalists had received their invitations and nothing else. Elena was in the second group. Vincent had read those reports with a tightening jaw and a quiet fury that those who knew him well had learned to recognize and respect. It was the same expression he wore when a business deal turned out to be dishonest, the same expression he wore when someone broke a promise. Vincent Castellano had many qualities, some of them hard, some of them complicated. But there was one thing about him that everyone agreed on. He despised unfairness. So when Vincent walked into that ballroom at 9:47 on that cold December evening, he was not just arriving at a party. He was arriving with a purpose. He spent the first 20 minutes doing what was expected of him, greeting donors, thanking sponsors, making the rounds with the practiced ease of a man who had attended 10,000 events and could navigate any room in the world. But the whole time his dark eyes were scanning, searching, looking for something specific. He found her at 9:52. She was sitting alone at a table near the windows, her emerald dress catching the light in a way that made it glow against the dark cityscape behind her. She was looking down at her hands, which were folded in her lap, and there was something about her posture that made Vincent's chest tighten. She looked like a woman who was trying very hard to hold herself together. Vincent stopped walking. One of his associates, a man named Frank DeLuca, who had worked with Vincent for 30 years, nearly bumped into him. "Boss," Frank said quietly. "Everything okay?" Vincent did not answer immediately. He was looking at Elena, and he was seeing something that no one else in that room had bothered to see. He was seeing the dress, not just the color or the cut, but the construction, the way it moved, the way it sat on her body, the beadwork along the neckline, the precision of the stitching. Vincent Castellano had spent decades in the luxury business. He had met the greatest designers in the world. He knew quality when he saw it. And what he saw sitting alone at that table was not just quality. It was art. "Frank," Vincent said, his voice low and steady. "Who is the woman in the green dress?" "The one sitting alone by the window." Frank looked. I am not sure, boss." "Want me to find out?" "No," Vincent said. "I already know who she is." And then Vincent Castellano did something. That stunned every single person in that ballroom. He changed direction. He stepped away from the group of donors who were waiting to speak with him, away from the politicians and the business leaders and the socialites, and he walked directly across the room toward the young woman sitting by herself. The crowd noticed. Of course they noticed. When Vincent Castellano moved with purpose, everyone noticed. Conversations faltered. Eyes followed. The blonde woman in the Valentino gown, the one who had dismissed Elena earlier, watched with her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Vincent reached Elena's table and stopped. Elena looked up, and what she saw was a tall, silver-haired man in a black tuxedo looking down at her with an expression that she could not immediately read. It was not pity. It was not curiosity. It was something closer to recognition, as if he had been looking for her and had finally found her. "Elena Vasquez," Vincent said. His voice was deep and unhurried, the voice of a man who never needed to raise it to be heard. Elena stared at him. She knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. And the fact that he knew her name short-circuited something in her brain for a moment. "Yes," she managed. "That's me." Vincent pulled out the chair next to her and sat down, not across from her, next to her. Close enough that the gesture was unmistakable. This was not a casual greeting. This was a statement. I have been looking forward to meeting you, Vincent said. He leaned back slightly and looked at her with those dark, assessing eyes. I have seen your work, all of it, not just the competition pieces, your videos, your designs, the jacket you made from reclaimed denim. Elena blinked. You saw the jacket? I have watched you explain how you constructed it 4 times, Vincent said, and something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. I learned something new each time. Elena opened her mouth, closed it, and then did something that surprised both of them. She laughed. It was a small, startled laugh, the kind that escapes when reality suddenly becomes too surreal to process. I'm sorry, she said. I just am sitting here at this beautiful party where no one has spoken to me for 2 hours, and now Vincent Castellano is telling me he watches my sewing videos. Vincent's expression changed then. The near smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. No one has spoken to you, he repeated. It was not a question. Elena hesitated. She did not want to complain. She did not want to seem ungrateful. But there was something about the way Vincent was looking at her that made dishonesty feel impossible. It's okay, she said. I understand. I do not exactly fit in here. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said very calmly, You are wrong about that. He stood up. Elena thought he was leaving, and something inside her sank. But Vincent did not leave. Instead, he extended his hand to her. Come with me, he said. Elena looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face, and she saw something there that she had not expected to see in the eyes of one of the most powerful men in America. She saw sincerity. She took his hand and stood, and the room held its breath. Vincent Castellano walked Elena Vasquez through the center of the ballroom, with her hand resting on his arm, and the effect was seismic. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. The orchestra kept playing, but the music seemed distant now, like a soundtrack, to something much more dramatic than a charity gala. People stared. People whispered. People pulled out their phones and held them at their sides, not quite bold enough to take pictures, but desperate to document what they were seeing. Because what they were seeing made no sense to them. Vincent Castellano, the most powerful man in the room, was walking with a young woman that none of them recognized, treating her with a deference and attention that he had not shown to anyone else that evening. Not to the senator who had tried to corner him near the bar, not to the hedge fund billionaire who had been angling for a private meeting, not to any of the glittering, connected, pedigreed guests who had spent weeks preparing for the chance to stand in Vincent's orbit. He had chosen her. Vincent led Eleanor to the head table, the large round table at the front of the ballroom that was reserved for the most important guests of the evening. There were 8 chairs. 7 of them were already occupied by people whose names appeared regularly in the pages of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. There was 1 empty chair, Vincent's chair, but instead of sitting down himself, Vincent pulled out the chair next to his, a chair that had been occupied by a man named Howard Prescott, a real estate developer who had been bragging about his proximity to the head table all evening, and looked at Howard with an expression that was perfectly pleasant and absolutely non-negotiable. Howard, Vincent, said, Would you mind? Howard Prescott looked at Vincent. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at the chair. And then he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked away without a word. Because when Vincent Castellano asked you to move, you moved. It was not a threat. It was simply a fact of nature, like gravity or the tide. Vincent held the chair for Eleanor. She sat down. Then Vincent sat beside her. And with that simple arrangement of bodies and chairs, the entire social hierarchy of the evening was rewritten. Eleanor was now sitting at the most important table in the room, at the right hand of the most powerful man in the room. And every person who had ignored her, dismissed her, looked through her, or turned their back on her, was now staring at her with an expression that combined shock, confusion, and the dawning realization that they had made a terrible miscalculation. The blonde woman in the Valentino gown set her champagne down very carefully, as if she was afraid her hands might shake. Vincent introduced Elena to the other guests at the table. He did not introduce her as a contestant or a finalist. He introduced her as one of the most talented young designers I have encountered in 40 years of working in this industry. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he might state the weather or the time. And because it was Vincent Castellano saying it, every person at that table accepted it as truth. Elena, for her part, was experiencing something close to an out-of-body experience. She was sitting next to Vincent Castellano at the head table of the most exclusive gala in New York, and he was talking to her as if she was the only person in the room. He asked her about her design process. He asked about her mother, and when Elena told him about Guadalupe, about the late night sewing by lamplight in their kitchen in El Paso, Vincent's expression softened in a way that made Elena understand something important about him. Beneath the power, beneath the reputation, beneath the name that made people whisper, Vincent Castellano was a man who had loved his own mother very much. He told her so. "My mother," Vincent said, his voice quieter now, intimate in a way that excluded the rest of the table. "My mother was a seamstress too. Did you know that? When my father was building the business, when we had nothing, she took in mending to help pay the rent. She used to tell me that every stitch was a prayer. I never understood what she meant until I watched your videos." Elena felt her eyes sting, and she blinked quickly because she was not going to cry at the Castellano Foundation Gala. She was absolutely not going to cry. "What was her name?" Elena asked. "Francesca," Vincent said. "She has been gone 20 years, but I still hear her voice every day." They looked at each other, and in that look was a bridge that spanned the vast distance between their two worlds. A bridge built from thread and fabric, and the memory of mothers who had given everything. The dinner was served. Eleanor ate food that she could not have named, but that was delicious, course after course of beautifully prepared dishes that arrived on white plates with artistic precision. The wine was probably extraordinary, but Eleanor barely tasted it. She was too busy talking with Vincent, who seemed genuinely fascinated by everything she had to say. But Elena was also aware of the undercurrent. She could feel the attention of the room pressing against her like a physical force. She could see the glances, the whispered consultations, the barely concealed attempts by other guests to figure out who she was and why Vincent Castellano had singled her out. And she could see the fear. Because that was what it was, Elena realized. The people who had ignored her were now afraid, not of Elena herself, but of what her elevation meant. In a room full of people who measured their worth by their proximity to power, Elena had just been placed at the center, and they had not seen it coming. They had not even considered the possibility. They had looked at her and seen a nobody. And now Vincent Castellano was treating her like the most important person at the party, and they were scrambling to recalculate. It would have been satisfying if Elena were the kind of person who enjoyed watching others squirm, but she was not. She was the kind of person who noticed a waiter struggling with a heavy tray and wanted to help. She was the kind of person who felt uncomfortable when others felt uncomfortable, even when they deserved it. Still, she would be lying if she said a small, quiet part of her did not feel a warm glow of vindication. Midway through dinner, a woman approached the table. Elena recognized her as one of the foundation staff members, a tall, efficient-looking woman named Patricia, who had organized the design competition. "Mr. Castellano," Patricia said, smiling brightly, "whenever you're ready, we can begin the presentation of the finalists' work." Vincent nodded. "But I would like to make a small change to the program," he said. Patricia's smile flickered. "Of course, what change?" "I will be presenting the finalists myself," Vincent said. "Personally?" Patricia blinked. "You, personally?" "But, sir, we have a panel of judges who have—" "I am aware," Vincent said, and his tone was still pleasant, but had acquired an edge that cut the conversation short. "I will present them myself. Please make the arrangements." Patricia nodded quickly and hurried away. Elena looked at Vincent. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to," Vincent replied, "but I want to. And there is a difference." He looked at her, and in his dark eyes she saw something that she would think about for a long time afterward. It was not charity. It was not pity. It was respect, pure, uncomplicated respect for who she was and what she had created. It is strange, the things that can change a life, a decision, a moment, a man who walks across a room and extends his hand. These things seem small when they happen, like single stitches in a vast piece of fabric. But later, when you step back and see the whole garment, you realize that those small moments were the ones that held everything together. Now, if this story is making you feel something right now, I want you to pause and leave a comment with the words "Everyone deserves to be seen." Type it below, because you never know who needs to read those words today. At 10:30, the lights in the ballroom dimmed and the orchestra fell silent, and a single spotlight illuminated the stage that had been set up at the front of the room. The 12 finalist designs were arranged on mannequins in a semicircle behind the podium, each one lit by its own carefully positioned light. The effect was dramatic, like a gallery exhibition, and Elena felt her heart begin to pound as she saw her 3 pieces glowing among the others. Vincent rose from the table and walked to the podium. He did not use notes. He did not need them. "Good evening," he began, and his voice filled the room without effort, carrying to every corner and every ear. "Thank you all for being here tonight. The Castellano Foundation was created 40 years ago with a simple belief that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. Our job is to fix that." He paused. He looked out at the audience. "Tonight, you are going to see the work of 12 extraordinary young designers. Some of them come from backgrounds that gave them every advantage. Some of them come from backgrounds that gave them none. I want you to look at their work and tell me if you can see the difference, because I cannot." A murmur moved through the crowd. Vincent began presenting the designs one by one. He spoke about each finalist with knowledge and appreciation that surprised everyone in the room, including the finalists themselves. He had done his homework. He knew their stories, their inspirations, their techniques. He spoke about a young man from Detroit who had taught himself pattern making from library books. He spoke about a woman from rural Oregon who created garments from sustainably harvested materials she gathered herself. He gave each designer their moment, their spotlight, their recognition. And then he came to Elena. He paused. The room waited. "The last designer I want to tell you about," Vincent said, "is someone who has been sitting at my table this evening. Some of you may have noticed. Some of you may have wondered why." Another pause. Longer this time. "Earlier tonight," he continued, "this young woman sat alone at a table by the window for nearly 2 hours. She is one of the 12 finalists whose work you see behind me. She was invited to this event because her talent earned her a place here. And yet, from what I understand, not a single person in this room spoke to her. Not one." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Eleanor felt her face flush. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink into the floor. But she also could not look away from Vincent, who was standing at that podium with the calm authority of a man who was about to make a point that no one would forget. "I want you to think about that," Vincent said. "I want you to think about what it means that a room full of people who pride themselves on their taste, their discernment, their ability to recognize value, that this room full of people looked at this young woman and saw nothing. I want you to ask yourself why." He let the question hang in the air like smoke. "Is it because she did not arrive in a limousine? Is it because she does not carry a name you recognize? Is it because her dress, which by the way is the finest piece of craftsmanship I have seen at any event this year, was not made by a designer whose label you could identify?" Vincent turned and looked directly at Elena. Elena Vasquez grew up in El Paso, Texas. Her mother was a seamstress who cleaned offices at night to support her family. Elena learned to sew before she could write. She moved to New York with $200 and a dream. She works at an alteration shop in Washington Heights. She creates her designs in her apartment using fabrics she buys at discount stores. And the 3 pieces you see behind me, that emerald jacket, that sculptured dress, and that reconstructed denim coat, were made entirely by hand in a room barely large enough to hold a sewing table. He paused again. "I have spent 40 years in the luxury business. I have met designers who have had every resource, every advantage, every open door. And I am telling you now, standing in front of all of you, that Elena Vasquez's work is among the most original and emotionally resonant design work I have ever encountered. The room erupted, not in applause, not yet, in sound, in reaction, in the collective exhalation of 700 people who were simultaneously processing the realization that they had been standing next to something extraordinary all evening and had not bothered to look. And then the applause came. It started slowly from the back of the room and it built. It grew. It swelled until it filled the ballroom like a wave, and people were standing, rising from their chairs, and the applause became a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 2 full minutes. Elena sat at the head table with tears streaming down her face, no longer trying to stop them, no longer caring. She looked at the room full of people who were clapping for her, and she felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been clenched tight for years, protecting a fragile thing that she had carried all the way from El Paso. It was the belief that she mattered, that her work mattered, that the little girl who had sat on the kitchen floor watching her mother sew had grown into a woman whose hands could create beauty from nothing, and the beautiful, painful, perfect irony was that it had taken the most powerful man in the room to make everyone else see what had been right in front of them all along. Vincent was not finished. He waited for the applause to subside, and then he said, "I'm going to do something now that I have never done at one of these events. I'm going to announce the winner of the design competition tonight, right now, rather than waiting for the end of the program." The room went quiet again. "The winner," Vincent said, and the judging panel was unanimous, "is Elena Vasquez." The second standing ovation was louder than the first. The hours after the announcement were a blur for Elena, a beautiful, overwhelming, life-altering blur. The prize was substantial, a $100,000 grant. Studio space in the Castellano Foundation's Designer Incubator program in Soho. A year of mentorship from industry professionals, access to materials, equipment and manufacturing resources, and perhaps most importantly, introductions to buyers, editors and industry leaders who could open doors that Eleanor had not even known existed. But the prize was almost secondary to what happened in the room after Vincent's speech. People came to her. The same people who had ignored her, dismissed her, looked through her. They came to her table one by one, and they introduced themselves, and they said things like, "I am so sorry I did not come talk to you earlier, and your work is absolutely stunning, and I would love to discuss opportunities with you." Elena was gracious. She was warm. She was kind. She shook every hand, accepted every compliment, exchanged contact. Information with editors and buyers and foundation board members who suddenly could not wait to be associated with her. She did not hold grudges. She did not make anyone feel bad. She treated every person who approached her with the same respect and openness that she would have wanted to receive hours earlier. Vincent watched this from a short distance away, standing with Frank DeLuca near the bar, a glass of sparkling water in his hand. He did not drink alcohol at events. He liked to keep his mind clear. "She handles it well," Frank observed. "Most people, they get a moment like that, they let it go to their head." Vincent nodded slowly. "She is not most people." Frank looked at his boss, a man he had known for 3 decades, and recognized the expression on Vincent's face. It was the same expression Vincent wore when he found a building worth investing in, when he identified something of value that others had overlooked. But there was something else in it too, something warmer, something almost paternal. "You see something in her," Frank said. It was not a question. "I see someone who reminds me of my mother," Vincent said quietly, "and I see someone who reminds me of myself a long time ago." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So what happens now?" "Now," Vincent said, "we make sure she has everything she needs. And then we get out of her way and let her work." The evening continued. The gala program proceeded with its planned events, speeches, performances, a charity auction. That raised several $1 million for the Foundation's programs. But the story of the night, the narrative that every guest would carry home with them and recount over brunch the next morning, was the story of the girl in the green dress. By midnight, Eleanor had been interviewed by 3 journalists, had her photograph taken dozens of times, and had received business cards from no fewer than 15 industry professionals who wanted to work with her. Her phone, which she had silenced during the event, had 67 text messages from Rosa, who had been following the evening's developments on social media with increasing hysteria. "Is that you with Vincent Castellano?" was one message. "Elena, call me right now," was another. "I am literally screaming in our apartment right now." "The neighbors are going to call the police," was a third. Eleanor smiled at her phone and typed back, "I will tell you everything when I get home. I love you." She was sitting at the head table again, alone now, the party winding down around her. Most of the guests had left. The waiters were clearing tables. The orchestra was packing up their instruments, and Elena was sitting in the chair that Vincent Castellano had pulled out for her, looking at the Manhattan skyline through the windows, thinking about how different the world looked from this height. A footstep behind her. She turned. Vincent was standing there, his tuxedo jacket draped over his arm, looking less like a billionaire business mogul and more like a tired man at the end of a long evening. But his eyes were still sharp, still present. "May I sit?" he asked. Elena smiled. "It's your chair." Vincent sat. They were quiet for a moment, looking at the city together. "Are you okay?" Vincent asked. Elena considered the question. "I think I am better than okay," she said. "I think I'm something I do not have a word for yet." Vincent nodded. "Good. That's the right answer." Another silence. The comfortable kind. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Of course. Why me? I mean, I understand the competition and I am grateful, more grateful than I can express. But you did something tonight that went beyond the competition. You made a statement. You made people see me. And I need to understand why." Vincent was quiet for a long time, so long that Elena wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, stripped of the authority and command that usually armored it. He sounded for the first time like a man sharing something he rarely shared. "When I was 24 years old," he began, "I went to a meeting with a group of investors. Big money, old money. The kind of money that has been in families so long they have forgotten what it feels like to earn it. I had a proposal that would have made all of them very wealthy. It was solid. It was smart. I had done the research. I knew the numbers." He paused, "But my name was Castellano, and they had decided what that meant before I walked into the room. They did not listen to my proposal. They did not look at my numbers. They looked at me and they saw my grandfather. They saw the rumors and the newspaper headlines and the stories their fathers had told them, and one of them, a man named Richardson, looked me in the eye and said, 'We do not do business with people like you.'" Elena felt something twist in her chest. "People like me," Vincent repeated. I remember those words more clearly than almost anything else in my life, and I remember the way the other men in the room looked at me after he said it, not with hostility, worse, with dismissal, as if I had already been removed from the room in their minds. "What did you do?" Elena asked. "I left," Vincent said. "I went home. I sat in the dark for a long time, and then I decided that I would spend the rest of my life making sure that no one could ever say those words to me again." He looked at Elena. "But here is what I have learned in the 40 years since," he said. "You can build an empire. You can accumulate wealth and power and influence. You can make yourself so big that no one dares to dismiss you. But you cannot undo what was done. You cannot go back to that room and make those men see you. That moment is gone. It lives inside you forever, that feeling of being invisible." His dark eyes held hers. "When I walked into this ballroom tonight," he said, "and I saw you sitting alone at that table in that beautiful dress you made with your own hands, I saw myself. I saw the 24-year-old kid who walked into a room full of people who had decided he did not belong. And I thought to myself, I am Vincent Castellano. I have more power in this room than everyone else combined, and I can use that power for a lot of things. But the best thing I can use it for, the only thing that really matters, is to make sure that what happened to me does not happen to her." Elena was crying. She was not ashamed of it. "You did not need me to see you, Elena," Vincent said. You were already extraordinary. All I did was make sure everyone else paid attention. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, careful not to smudge her makeup, and then laughed at herself for caring about her makeup at a moment like this. My mother, Elena said, her voice shaking slightly, used to say that the most powerful thing in the world is when someone who has been seen decides to see someone else. Vincent was still for a moment. Then he said, Your mother was a wise woman. She was, Elena agreed. She was everything. They sat together in the quiet ballroom as the last of the staff cleared away the remnants of the evening. Two people from very different worlds, connected by thread and memory and the stubborn refusal to let the world decide their worth. Before they parted ways, Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small card. It was not a business card. It was a handwritten note on heavy cream paper, the kind that Vincent used for personal correspondence. This is the number for my direct line, he said. Not my office, not my assistant, me. If you ever need anything, advice, resources, someone to talk to when it gets hard, and it will get hard, Elena, because the climb is always hard, you call that number. Elena took the card. She held it carefully, the way you hold something precious. Thank you, she said. And then, because she felt she had to say more, because the moment demanded more, she added, Not just for tonight. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you. For using your voice to make others see me. I will never forget it. Vincent stood and buttoned his jacket. He looked at her one more time with those dark, unreadable eyes. Do not thank me, he said. Just do what you were born to do. Make beautiful things. Tell stories with your hands. And when you are standing where I am standing one day, and you will be, remember what it felt like to sit alone at that table. Remember, and do for someone else what I did for you tonight. He extended his hand. Helena shook it. And then Vincent Castellano turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, his security detail falling in step behind him. Elena watched him go. Then she looked at the card in her hand and at the skyline beyond the window and at the mannequin across the room that was still wearing her emerald jacket under its perfect light. She picked up her phone and called Rosa. Her sister answered on the first ring. Eleanor, Rosa said breathlessly. Tell me everything. Eleanor looked at the city. She looked at the card. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass, a young woman in a green dress who had walked into a room as nobody and was walking out as someone who could never be invisible again. Everything just changed, Eleanor said. Everything. The studio was on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse in Soho, a bright, open space with exposed brick walls, tall windows that flooded the room with natural light, and enough room for Elena to spread out her fabrics, her patterns, her sketches, and her dreams. She had been working in this space for 5 months now, ever since the Castellano Foundation had set her up with everything Vincent had promised. The grant money had allowed her to leave her job at Bella Costuras, though she still visited Doña Carmen every week, bringing coffee and fabric samples and sitting with the old woman at the shop's small table, talking about stitching and life and the strange way the world worked. Doña Carmen had cried when Elena told her she was leaving. Then she had dried her eyes, taken Elena's hands and said, I always knew you would go. I was just holding you until you were ready. Elena thought about that often, about the people who hold you until you are ready, about her mother, about Doña Carmen, about Vincent. The 6 months since the gala had been the most intense of Elena's life. She had worked harder than she had ever worked, harder even than the days in Washington Heights when she would sew until 3 in the morning and then get up at 6 to go to the alteration shop. But this was different. This work was hers. Every garment she created was a piece of her story, her vision, her voice. And for the first time in her life, people were listening. The industry buzz that had started the night of the gala had not faded. If anything, it had intensified. Articles had been written, interviews had been conducted. Elena had been featured in Vogue, not on the cover, not yet, but in a 4-page spread that described her as one of the most exciting new voices in American fashion. The photographs showed her in her studio, surrounded by fabric, her hands moving with the confident precision that came from 20 years of practice. Her social media following had exploded. The videos she used to post from her apartment now came from the studio, but they had the same warmth, the same intimacy, the same genuine passion that had drawn viewers in the first place. She still explained her process. She still showed every stitch. She still talked to the camera as if she were talking to a friend. And the clothes were extraordinary. Elena had taken the resources and space and time that the foundation had given her and had channeled everything into a debut collection that told the story of women like her mother, women who worked with their hands, who created beauty from nothing, who held their families together with thread and love and quiet, relentless determination. Each piece was named after a woman in Elena's life. The Guadalupe was a structured coat in deep burgundy that combined traditional Mexican textile techniques with modern architectural design. The Carmen was a flowing dress made from reclaimed fabric that moved like water and hit like a brick. The Rosa was a bold, vibrant jacket that burst with color and energy, the kind of garment you could not ignore even if you tried. The collection was scheduled to debut in 2 weeks at a small showcase that the foundation had organized. 50 buyers, 30 editors, a handful of celebrities who had expressed interest. It was small by industry standards, but for Elena, it was everything. Rosa had moved in with her. Not into the studio, of course, but into the new apartment that Elena had rented in the East Village. A one-bedroom that was small by most standards, but felt like a palace compared to their place in Washington Heights. Rosa was 22 now, studying business at a community college during the day and helping Elena with logistics and social media in the evenings. She had turned out to have a natural talent for the business side of fashion, a talent that complemented Elena's creative vision perfectly. They were a team. They had always been a team. But the road had not been smooth. Vincent had warned Elena that the climb would be hard, and he had been right. The fashion industry was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Elena had encountered skepticism from people who saw her as a novelty, a feel-good story that would fade when the next one came along. She had dealt with manufacturers who did not take her seriously. She had faced the quiet, insidious doubt that crept in at 3 in the morning when the studio was dark and the fabric was not cooperating and the voice in her head whispered, "Who do you think you are?" On those nights, Eleanor would take out the cream-colored card that Vincent had given her and look at the number written in his distinctive hand. She had called it only once 3 months after the gala, on a night when everything seemed impossible. Vincent had answered on the second ring. Elena, he had said, and the way he said her name with warmth and weight had immediately made her feel steadier. She had told him about the doubt, about the fear, about the feeling that she was in over her head, that the world she had entered was too big and too fast and too unforgiving for a girl from El Paso who had learned to sew on her mother's kitchen floor. Vincent had listened without interrupting, and when she was done he had said something that she had written on a piece of paper and taped to the wall of her studio, where she could see it every day. "Elena," he had said, "the people who never doubt themselves are the ones you should worry about. Doubt means you care. Doubt means you are paying attention. The only people who never feel like they are in over their heads are people who have stopped trying to grow. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. Now get back to work." She had gotten back to work. And now, 6 months after the night that changed everything, Elena was standing in her studio on a Tuesday afternoon, pinning the final adjustments on the Guadalupe coat, when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was a number she did not recognize. "Hello," she said, holding the phone between her ear and her shoulder while her hands continued to work with the pins. "Is this Elena Vasquez?" a female voice asked. "Yes. My name is Catherine. Wells, I am the creative director at Harman and Hale." Elena's hands went still. Harman and Hale was one of the most prestigious fashion houses in America. They had been in business for over 60 years. Their creative director was a position of enormous influence, and Catherine Wells was a legend in the industry. "Yes," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hello, Ms. Wells." "I have been watching you," Catherine said, and her voice was crisp and direct, the voice of a woman who did not waste time. "I saw your pieces at the Castellano Gala. I have been following your work since then, and I have a proposition for you." Elena's heart was hammering. "Harman & Hale is launching a new diffusion line," Catherine continued. "Younger, bolder, more accessible. We are looking for a guest designer to collaborate on the debut collection. Someone with a fresh perspective and an authentic voice. Someone who understands craftsmanship at a fundamental level." She paused. "I would like that someone to be you." Elena sat down slowly on her work stool. The studio was very quiet. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the fabrics and the mannequins and the sketches pinned to the walls, all the evidence of a dream that had been taking shape for 20 years. "Can I ask," Elena said, "how you heard about me?" Catherine Wells laughed, a short, warm laugh. "Eleanor," she said, "Vincent Castellano called me personally. He does not call people personally for anything. He told me that if I did not reach out to you, I would be making the biggest mistake of my career. And say what you will about Vincent, the man is never wrong about talent." Elena closed her eyes. She pressed her free hand flat against her chest and felt her own heartbeat, strong and steady. "I'd like to hear more," Elena said. The conversation lasted an hour. Catherine described the scope of the collaboration, the creative freedom Elena would have, the resources that Harman & Hale would provide. It was, by any measure, the kind of opportunity that transformed careers. It was the kind of opportunity that most designers waited a lifetime for and never received. Eleanor did not say yes immediately. She told Catherine she needed time to think, to discuss it with her sister, to make sure it was the right fit. Catherine respected that. She said she would wait. When Elena hung up the phone, she sat in the quiet studio for a long time. Then she called Rosa. "You need to come to the studio," Elena said. "Is everything okay?" Rosa asked, alarm in her voice. "Everything is more than okay," Elena said, echoing words she had spoken once before, in a ballroom 42 stories above Manhattan. "I think everything is exactly what it was always supposed to be." Rosa arrived 20 minutes later, out of breath from running up the stairs. Elena told her everything. Rosa listened with widening eyes, her hand over her mouth. When Elena finished, Rosa said very quietly, "Mom would be so proud of you." Elena nodded. She looked at the Guadalupe coat on its mannequin, the burgundy fabric catching the afternoon light. She looked at the card taped to her wall with Vincent's words. She looked at her sister, who had been with her through every struggle and every triumph, who had stood in their tiny apartment and modeled clothes under a single lamp, who had believed in Elena even when Elena had stopped believing in herself. "She is here," Elena said. "She has always been here." The showcase happened 2 weeks later, on a warm evening in early June. The venue was a gallery in Chelsea, a clean, modern space with white walls and polished concrete floors. Elena had chosen it specifically because it did not look like a typical fashion venue. She wanted her clothes to stand on their own, without the distraction of chandeliers or velvet. 50 buyers came, 30 editors came, several celebrities came. Rosa managed the door. Doña Carmen sat in the front row, wearing a new dress that Elena had made for her, a simple, beautiful garment in soft blue that made the old woman look like a queen. And Vincent Castellano came. He arrived quietly, without fanfare, without the entourage. He wore a dark suit and an open-collared shirt, and he slipped into a seat near the back of the room as if he were just another guest. But Elena saw him. Of course she saw him, and when their eyes met across the room, he gave her a small nod that said everything that needed to be said. "You are ready. Show them who you are." Elena showed. "Them?" The models walked through the gallery wearing Elena's collection, and the room fell silent in the way that rooms fall silent when they encounter something real. The Guadalupe coat drew audible gasps. The Carmen dress made 2 editors reach for their phones simultaneously. And the Rosa jacket, bold and bright and unapologetically alive, received a round of spontaneous applause that broke the quiet and filled the gallery with something electric. When the last model had walked, and the lights came up, Elena stood in the center of the room surrounded by her creations, and she looked at the faces looking back at her. buyers who wanted her clothes, editors who wanted her story, people who saw her, really, truly saw her. She thought about the girl who had sat alone at a table by a window in a ballroom 42 stories above this very city. She thought about how far that girl had traveled, not in miles, but in belief, in courage, in the willingness to keep going when every sign said, "Stop." And she thought about what Vincent had said on the night they first met. "When you are standing where I am standing one day, remember what it felt like to sit alone at that table. Remember and do for someone else what I did for you tonight." Elena made a decision in that moment, a decision that would define the next chapter of her life just as powerfully as the gala had defined this one. She would create a program, a foundation of her own eventually, something that would find young people with talent and hunger and no connections, no resources, no safety net, and give them what she had been given, a chance, a spotlight, a hand reaching out in a room full of turned backs. She would remember, and she would pay it forward. The showcase was a triumph. Every major fashion publication covered it. Buyers placed orders. The Harman and Hale collaboration was announced the following week to widespread excitement. Catherine Wells was quoted as saying that Elena Vasquez represented the future of American fashion, and for once the hype was not exaggerated. But the moment from that evening that Elena would remember most clearly, the moment that she would carry with her for the rest of her life, happened after the show, when the gallery had mostly emptied and the caterers were cleaning up and Rosa was comparing notes with a buyer from Nordstrom. Vincent was leaving. He had stayed for the entire show, watching from the back, and now he was walking toward the door. Elena intercepted him. "You came," she said. "Of course I came," Vincent said, as if there had never been any question. Elena looked at this man, this complicated, powerful, surprisingly tender man who had changed her life with 5 words. "Come with me," he had said, on a night when she had been about to give up, and she had taken his hand, and nothing had been the same since. "I have a question for you," Elena said. "Ask," Vincent said. "That night at the gala, you told me about the meeting with the investors, about the man named Richardson, who said he did not do business with people like you." Vincent nodded. "I remember. Whatever happened to him?" Elena asked. "To Richardson?" Vincent's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "He came to me 15 years later," Vincent said. "He needed financing for a project. His firm was in trouble. He was desperate." "And," Elena said. "I gave him the financing," Vincent said. Elena stared at him. "You helped him?" "After what he did." "I helped him," Vincent confirmed. "Not because he deserved it, but because I did not want to be the kind of man who let an old wound dictate his decisions. Holding grudges is expensive, Elena. It costs you parts of yourself that you cannot afford to lose." He looked at her. "Remember that," he said. "When you are powerful enough to punish the people who dismissed you, choose not to. That is real strength. That is how you break the cycle." Elena thought about the blonde woman in the Valentino gown, about the men by the window who had looked at her and seen nothing, about all the small casual cruelties that powerful people inflict on those they deem unworthy. She could hate them for it. She could carry that anger and let it fuel her. Many people would, many people did. Or she could let it go. She could take the energy that anger required and pour it into something better, something beautiful, something that would outlast the anger and the people who caused it. "I will remember," Elena said. "Good," Vincent said, and he turned to leave. But at the door he stopped and looked back at her one more time. "Elena," he said. "Yes?" "That green dress you wore to the gala. It was the most beautiful garment I have ever seen. And I have seen them all." Then he was gone. Elena stood in the empty gallery, surrounded by her collection, by the evidence of her talent and her persistence and her refusal to be invisible. She thought about her mother, about Guadalupe's hands moving over fabric in the warm kitchen light. She thought about Rosa, about Doña Carmen, about Frank DeLuca and Patricia and Catherine Wells and all the people who had played their parts in this story, large and small. And she thought about the title of her debut collection, the 4 words that were printed on the program that every guest had received that evening. 4 words that told her story better than any speech or article or standing ovation ever could. She called them home. Because that was what Elena had done. She had taken all the lost pieces of herself, all the dreams and fears and hopes and doubts, all the stitches her mother had taught her, and all the wounds the world had given her, and she had called them home. She had sewn them together into something whole. Outside the gallery, New York hummed with its eternal energy. Taxis honked, sirens wailed, people hurried along the sidewalks, each one carrying their own invisible story. And somewhere among them, walking back to her apartment through the warm June night, was a young woman in jeans and a plain white shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders, her hands strong and capable and full of purpose. Elena Vasquez, daughter of a seamstress, sister of a dreamer, student of a wise old woman, protégé of a powerful man with a good heart, and a designer who had learned the most important lesson of all, that the thread that connects us is stronger than the scissors that try to cut us apart, that being seen is a gift you can give to someone else, and that the most beautiful garments are not the ones that cost the most, but the ones that carry the most love. They ignored her early in the night. They ignored her when she walked through the door. They ignored her when she sat alone at a table by the window, wearing a dress she had made with her own 2 hands, a dress that carried the spirit of her mother in every stitch. But then he came, and he saw her, and he placed her at his side. And nobody ignored Elena Vasquez ever again. If you watched this all the way through, then you felt something. You know what it is like to be overlooked, to be underestimated, to sit alone in a room full of people who have decided you do not matter, and you know how powerful it is when someone finally sees you. If you made it to the end, leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can know who you are and who truly connects with the stories on this channel. If this story moved you, hit the like button so that it can reach other people who need to hear it tonight. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their moment is coming. And if you are not subscribed yet, subscribe right now so you never miss a story, because this channel is where invisible people become unforgettable. And remember, the next time you are in a room and you see someone sitting alone, be the person who walks over. Be the person who extends a hand. Be the Vincent in someone else's story. Because you never know. That person sitting alone might just change the world.